I've been asking Elon Musk's AI Grok a lot of questions about XRP, and Grok has an important message for all of you regarding this bull run. When it thinks this bull run peak will occur, will depend on a number of important factors that we talk about a lot on this channel. But Grok gives me some unique insights that I didn't have access to before, and I wanted to share this with you guys because I think it's really cool and interesting. To begin, I'd like to talk about what I asked Grok and how it replied, since I believe this is very important. I asked Grok to give me an estimate of when the crypto market top will likely happen based on past cycle tops and global factors such as the Federal Reserve rates and M2 supply. Just give me a date in the next 3 months, like a business analyst would. So Grok pretty much just took this information and started by looking at trends in past cycles. Bitcoin, which is one of the most popular cryptocurrencies, often sets the tone for the whole market. In the past, halving events have affected Bitcoin's market cycles. These events lower the block reward and cause supply spikes, which usually lead to bull runs. The cycle tops and happenings from the past give us a framework for what we can look at now. The decrease in 2012 is a case in point. Bitcoin's high point was in November 2013, about a year later at $1,150. After halving in 2016, the high point was reached in December 2017, 17 months later at $19,500. The halving in 2020, Bitcoin hits its peak on November 21st, 2020, which is about 18 months later. Based on past trends, the peak could happen between 12 and 18 months after the 2024 split. This would give us a window of time from April to October 2025. I want to be clear now, in terms of Bitcoin, this is the top. It's not true that this is the high point for all crypto coins. Altcoins tend to reach their peak a little later. That's what we've seen in the past. Of course, 2021 was a bit of an exception to that rule, but this is what usually happens. The altcoin season does happen, after Bitcoin's first big peak. According to new information, Bitcoin hit $112,000 on May 22nd. Yes, we've now passed $120,000. Grok might not always have all of this information at its disposal. The federal funds rate has stayed between 4.25 and 4.5% since December 24th, when it was lowered by 25 basis points. The Federal Reserve is being careful because it wants to keep inflation and economic growth in check. Posts on X say that people think interest rates will be lowered even more in late 2025. This could make crypto more flexible and drive up prices. Of course, this is going to be very big. We have once again seen examples from the past of what happens when the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates and how this is good for the markets. Grok talks about that here. In 2022, rates were raised quickly from almost 0% to 4.5% by early 2023. At the same time, the crypto bear market started and Bitcoin dropped 78%. The Fed's rate cut on September 24th, on the other hand, caused Bitcoin to rise to $80,000 per coin by November. More rate cuts in 2025 could extend the bull run, but staying at high rates or worrying about inflation again could speed up a market peak by making people less willing to take risks. In other words, the Federal Reserve might not lower rates, and the market is very close to its peak right now, which, of course, none of you want to hear. The reason Trump is pushing the Fed so hard to cut rates is really important. Trump knows full well that the midterm elections are coming up. How well the crypto market does will depend a lot on how well the stock market does. The markets pretty much decide Trump's whole job as president. If the markets are doing well, Trump is doing a good job. Doesn't he do a good job as president? Hence, Trump is aware of this, so he says, okay, the liquidity isn't really there for us to have explosive growth like we did in November, December, and January. If we want to see something like that again, the Fed needs to cut rates. That's why he's putting so much pressure on the Fed and Jerome Powell right now, doing pretty much everything he can to make sure that happens. As you can see, changes in crypto prices are strongly linked to changes in world liquidity as measured by M2. A good sign is the past correlation of about 0.75 with the SPBDMI crypto index. Other measures actually have a higher correlation at about 90%. But even so, 75 to 90% is a really high correlation when it comes to price action. If you don't know what M2 is, it's the amount of money in circulation around the world, right? The price of digital goods goes up when the amount of money in circulation goes up. That's a good rule of thumb. The US money supply, M2, rose from 21.86 trillion in April to 21.94 trillion on May 25th. This shows a small increase in liquidity and other countries' loose monetary policies like quantitative easing. Of course, this did LPUS get some good solid price movement not long ago. Usually when a country like China or Europe lowers interest rates and the world's money supply rises as a result, we see explosive growth very soon after. This was happening here in May. Of course, in April, so if we do see more quantitative easing, making money, or just stimulus, that being said, it's possible that the prices of digital assets will keep going up as inflation does too. There are also a lot of geopolitical factors at play, such as the Genius Act, the Clarity Act, Gary Gensler's replacement, the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, and other things like that. There are also trade tariffs, which we know have some effect on the market, so there are a lot of different things going on. But Grok basically brings them all together, and this is its estimate and synthesis. Basically, Grok is saying that past cycle pieces point to a top 12 to 18 months after the halving that lines up with a cycle top from April to October 25. This time, though, Grok thinks the crypto market will likely reach its peak between July 1st, 2025, which means it's already happened, and September 30th, 2025. This 3-month window takes into account how cycles have happened in the past. Rate cuts from the Federal Reserve are expected in July and September if they happen. There are also possible global or macroeconomic factors that could start a distribution phase right now. I want to make things clear. I think Grok's estimate is a little off. I'll explain why, but first I asked Grok one more question to get to my main point. What if the Fed starts lowering rates in September and keeps doing so until the first quarter of 2026, which is what many people think will happen? In that case, what is the most likely market high? When is it going to happen? The Fed then looks at all of this and says, but based on this information, we can see that the peak is most likely to happen in this event between January 1st, 2026 and March 31st, 2026. This 3-month range shows how the Fed's monetary strategy and the rise in M2 during this time have caused the cycle to lengthen. However, I believe it's less likely than not that China or Europe will keep doing quantitative easing. They can't go very far anymore. That's the main reason I said that. And there is still some doubt about that. Basically, everyone is just waiting for the US to start dropping those rates. Based on how slowly the Fed is moving things along right now, I do think that the first quarter of 2026 is a good guess for when this cycle top could happen. Once more, though, this depends on the Fed cutting rates. Grok says that there's a very good chance that we'll reach our peak anytime between now and September if the Fed decides to let rates stay the same and not drop them at all. That's something to remember, and I think it's something that definitely needs our attention, and it's really likely to happen. I think it's more likely that the Fed will lower rates because they have to. You already know how business is going right now, but this is something to remember. Along with that, there are a few other things that bother me about this, but I will say that I believe we are currently in a pretty good accumulation phase. As you may know, the stochastic RSI for XRP, Bitcoin, and many other cryptocurrencies is currently in the oversold group, which means that we will be saying goodbye in the short term anyway. There are also a lot of support lines at the bottom, which is why I just recently bought more Bitcoin futures to add to the ones I already have in case the next big pump happens, which I think is going to happen pretty soon. If you want to be ready for that when it does, make sure you're in Crypto Crusaders. It's simple to join. Becoming a member of a group where you can see all of my trades is free and only takes 15 minutes. In other words, you can see all of my past trades. You can look at my past to see that some months have been 400% higher. I mean, it's really amazing. In that case, I'd love to see you guys. I want to know what you guys think of today's movie. Did it excite you? What do you think the market's high point will be? Write your answer in the box below. If you like the videos, don't forget to like and follow. See you in Crypto Crusaders. Lots of love. Goodbye.